and welcome to another episode of The Medicine Show. This time I'm going to be talking about outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics, specifically in the context of the current coronavirus pandemic that is occurring as this is being recorded.
On December 31st of 2019, the World Health Organization became aware that several individuals in Wuhan, China were being treated for a pneumonia, a respiratory illness of unknown origin. Many of these people had been to a live animal market in the city, and there was some hope that this illness was spread directly from animals to people rather than from one human to another. Researchers soon determined that the illness was caused by a coronavirus similar to the one responsible for the SARS outbreak in 2003. The virus itself has come to be known as SARS-CoV-2, and the illness it causes as COVID-19 for coronavirus disease of 2019. On the 23rd of January 2020, the Chinese authorities started lockdown procedures in Wuhan to try and contain or slow the spread of the virus. And on January 30th, the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency. As of the time of this recording, the coronavirus has spread throughout the world and has outbreaks of differing sizes in many different countries. So an outbreak is what we call it when disease starts to appear in a population where it wasn't previously present. And when this starts to multiply, starts to spread exponentially, people refer to that as an epidemic. And then when that goes around the world, sometimes people use the term pandemic for that. Pandemic seems to be a term that the global public health community is moving away from. It's sort of becoming an outdated term. The word plague is used in some older historical writings to mean the same thing, although nowadays in any modern writing, the word plague refers to a specific disease caused by the bacteria of the genus Yersinia, like bubonic plague. Anytime that there is an epidemic going on, one of the things that is very important to do is to try and slow its spread, because if everybody gets sick at once, whatever infrastructure exists for dealing with that sort of thing gets overwhelmed very quickly. For example, hospital beds would all be full if everybody was sick at once. There wouldn't be enough healthcare providers to take care of people, and so on. So one of the things that people are paying a lot of attention to in this situation is social distancing and postponing large gatherings. Social distancing meaning especially not initiating a lot of physical contact between people socially. For example, waving instead of shaking hands could be an example. This particular thing, because it's a respiratory virus, unlike, say, Ebola, it is not transmitted from skin to skin exactly. You can get mucus on your hands, respiratory secretions on your hands, get those on somebody else's hands, which can then come in contact with their respiratory mucosa if they are, putting their fingers in their nose or something like that, and then they can get it. But it's not going to get through the skin. So it's kind of, an extra precaution. If you had to shake somebody's hand and then you went and washed it right away, or if you just, forgot and shook someone's hand out of habit, and then they said, oh, did I mention I've been really sick? Then you can go and wash it, and it's not going to get in through your hand. So that's just something to keep in mind as an extra way of lowering risk. A lot of people have been asking my advice about this situation with the coronavirus, and my first piece of advice is simply don't be afraid, but don't be reckless either. a good analogy might be driving a car. When you're driving somewhere, if you're used to driving, you don't necessarily feel a lot of fear and panic about the fact that you're driving somewhere, but you don't want to run red lights either. So you just want to, follow some general precautions. Don't be reckless. Don't be cavalier. Take it seriously and treat it with respect, but don't be afraid either, and don't panic, and don't do anything that wouldn't be reasonable if the situation weren't going on. I'm a big believer in all-cause preparedness, that you want to be ready for a variety of different things. I think it can be a reasonable thing to have a lot of food at your house, some supplies that could get you through several days or maybe a couple weeks if that's possible for you. I think that's not an incautious thing to do under any circumstances. But I also don't think that it's necessary that you, completely isolate yourself or anything like that. Not only do I think it's not necessary, I think that it's unhelpful, and I think that it has health consequences of its own that are probably not what you want under most circumstances. So as far as this situation goes, those precautions are mostly wash your hands frequently and don't touch your face, because that's how the virus gets into your system. It's through your respiratory system, through your sinuses, through your mouth. It's not going to get through your skin. So even if you shake hands with somebody who has just wiped their nose and has a virus, it's not going to get through the skin of your hands and into your bloodstream. It's going to get in your system if you touch your face, if you, put your finger up your nose or something like that. Then it's going to enter into your system. So that's how this virus gets around. It gets around in secretions from the respiratory system. And those secretions can be a smear on somebody's hand. They might also be droplets in the air, which could be breathed in. So, you don't want somebody to sneeze on your face. You don't want to be in a situation where you're around sick people and don't have any sort of personal protective equipment, but you probably don't need to wear a mask outside all the time, and you certainly don't need to worry that you're going to get it just by touching someone or something like that. It's really a matter of transferring those respiratory secretions from one person to another, and that's why you have to wash your hands, is because you may have touched something that they touched while they had some mucus or something like that on their hands, and then you could possibly transfer that to your own respiratory system by touching your face. So wash your hands a lot and don't touch your face a lot. The next piece of advice that I would give is also kind of very obvious, but if you are sick, stay home. Don't go around other people. You may have something that is just a little bit of a sickness for you. That same sickness might be very severe for somebody else. And this shouldn't really take a pandemic for it to be the case, but a lot of people are unfortunately forced into situations where they have to choose between going broke and potentially getting other people sick. So that's a very unfortunate situation, but I do think that it is important to realize with this or any other respiratory virus that that it is a life and death thing for some people, that old people who already have other problems might have the exposure to the same sickness that you have, and instead of being a case of the sniffles, it might be a case of pneumonia that kills them, or that seriously impacts their lives. So that's something to be conscious of, not just now, but in any situation. It's a very serious thing, and it should be treated very seriously. If you find yourself in the position of needing to take care of a sick person, this is really what you need to focus on: keeping them comfortable and giving them supportive care, keeping them warm, relieving their pain, symptoms, fever in this case, coughing, keeping them in a comfortable position that helps them breathe, and making sure that they get plenty of rest. And at the same time, you need to focus on containing it, making sure you're not getting it from them, making sure you're not going out and giving it to other people. So all of that is extremely important. Right now, a lot of these cases are being managed in healthcare facilities, but if we get to a situation where millions of people are sick at the same time, most of them are going to be taken care of at home. And it's a reasonable candidate for that for the vast majority of people. And we've all had respiratory illnesses before. We've all had things with similar sets of symptoms as what this has in its milder manifestations. So it's not unfamiliar to most people, and you probably have remedies that you already like as far as dealing with coughs and fevers and so forth. We have a sort of a campfire story here in Lexington that represents a cultural memory of a pandemic from long ago, specifically the second cholera pandemic, which happened here in the 1830s. It started somewhere in Asia, maybe in the area we'd now call Bangladesh, spread through the Russian Empire, made it from there into the British Empire, and from there came over to the United States. Now, cholera, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is basically like a stomach ache that kills you. You get very bad vomiting and diarrhea, both of which produce a white milky substance that looks a lot like horchata, and you get severe pain, cramping, shooting pains throughout your body, and quite often people die. It had a very high mortality rate, and it was known at the time that this had made landfall in the United States, but it hadn't come to Kentucky yet. It hadn't come to Lexington yet. And the people here felt sure that it wasn't going to. They felt confident that they were going to be fine, that there was nothing really to worry about, perhaps that they were too much in God's favor for there to be a pandemic here or something along those lines. So what they decided to do was get together and have a ball to celebrate, a big southern rich people kind of ball, where all the high society people in Lexington and the surrounding area got together and had a dinner and dancing and things like that. And quite predictably, what happened was someone brought cholera to the ball, and within a few days it had spread throughout Lexington, and rich people and poor people and young and old and just about everybody else were sick and dying, and it was a very big public health disaster. The story goes on to tell about how a man named William Solomon, known as King Solomon, who was sort of notorious alcoholic, became a public health volunteer. He worked with burying bodies. He had been a well digger and cellar excavator before he lost his own family to disease earlier on in life. And so, just basically altruism from him and other people like him is what ended up carrying the day. And hubris and lack of taking the pandemic seriously is what sort of made it as bad as it was in the first place. And that, I suppose, brings me to my next point, which is that outbreaks, epidemics are social and cultural phenomena, and they require social and cultural responses. What I mean by that is how an epidemic goes is not a matter simply of the individual health of each individual person that gets it, but a matter of how things are set up in the society around them. We don't get cholera anymore because we have sources of clean water. Well, most of us don't get cholera anymore. There are still outbreaks occasionally in the world, but not nearly what there used to be, and they tend to be much decreased in scale. Because people worked together to create a lasting solution to that. Something like this is going to require a little bit of a different type of response from the community. One simple thing that you can do is to think about who in your life is most vulnerable. And this would probably be older people and people with pre-existing heart and lung issues. And if yourself is on that list, then you might want to think about who might be able to help you and who might you be able to turn to for help. And if you're not one of the more vulnerable people, you might think about who you know that is and ask them if there's anything that you can do to help them. In times of crisis, simple mutual aid like this is really what gets communities through. You know, it might be for some people that going to the grocery store or otherwise going out in public to run a simple errand might become a life-threatening thing if there were a lot of people in the community who were infected with a respiratory virus and they were, someone who might easily die of it. Whereas for most of us, that same activity is not going to be very dangerous. And so that's a way that you might be able to do a simple chore for somebody, a simple errand for somebody, and really save them a lot of risk. In the culture that fetishizes rugged individualism in which a lot of us find ourselves, this might take some getting used to, but it really is possible. And in other times of crisis, including other places right now that are undergoing serious outbreaks, people are doing this, and it's helpful. If the area that you live in does become the center of a large outbreak, there will probably also be opportunities for public health volunteers. This is, something that might expose you to more risk. It might involve, helping at places where people are in isolation and so forth. But with the proper precautions, it's not necessarily an extremely dangerous thing to do if you're not already a very vulnerable person. So that's something to consider, depending on what your own life situation and your own health situation is, that might be a good option for you, or it might not. Another extremely important thing that you can do is use your platform, whatever that is, whether you're a parent, whether you're someone who does herbal medicine, whether you're, a person who has a lot of friends, whoever you have around you, use your platform to reach out to people and share with them what you've learned about the situation. And don't be afraid to push back against misinformation, because there are a lot of loudmouthed people out there spreading a lot of misinformation, either to incite panic, to downplay the seriousness of things, to try and sell untried cures that have no real physiological basis for how they would actually work in this situation, and so on and so forth. And, don't be afraid to share what you have learned and say, this is not really right, and here is why I think so. Don't be afraid to gently and lovingly, or perhaps sternly and lovingly, call someone out if you see them engaging in behavior that puts themselves or other people at risk, like going out in public when they're sick, or like coughing on their hands and then touching things without washing their hands first. And the list goes on and on. Raising your own awareness of the situation and then using that to raise the awareness of the people around you is one of the most powerful things that you can do. And of course, it's important that you not be an egotistical jerk or a know-it-all about it, because then it'll just agitate people and it won't really help anyone. And in keeping with that, remember that anything that you do know about this is subject to change. It's very much a dynamic and emerging situation, and even people who are devoting every waking moment of every day to working on it and trying to understand it still have a lot that they don't know yet. So with any new information you come across, you want to ask, how do we know this, and how well do we know this? How sure are we about this? You'll see a lot of statistics, for example, about things like mortality rate, and those are estimates, and they're estimates that are going to change as things go along, and they are not necessarily going to be indicative of any individual case or of how it plays out in a different scenario. The death rate might be very different in one country compared to another, and so forth.
That's all for this time. Thank you for joining me on the Medicine Show. As the situation develops, we'll probably talk more about it, but the next episode is going to be about spring flowers, and it's going to be a little bit less intense. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you on the next episode.